Very good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Friday Drinks. Today, it's a very sad moment. We woke up to the news of one of the esteemed stockbrokers who passed on, Ndo. And I know you guys are very sad and in a very sad mood, but maybe you can say a word or two about Ndo.
Yeah, it's a very sad one. Ndo was one of the most preeminent stockbrokers in our market. So his full name is Ndoda Namgukuka. He, just today, this morning in the stockbrokers group, some message was posted to say he had passed on. And some of the senior stockbrokers who are in that group obviously were then sort of sharing a bit of their interaction with him. So I picked up that at some point he was at Sajit stockbrokers, and Sajit was the first stockbroker in Zimbabwe. Comrade, is that correct?
Well, when I got into the market about 20 years ago, look, the stock exchange is old. It was founded 1896. I don't know.
Okay. So maybe in recent times.
But in recent times, when it was open outcry before we automated it, Sajit, so you had a number when you traded, and Sajit, I remember, was number one.
It used to be part of the Anglo-American group, BAD and FMB.
Okay.
That was the stockbroking arm.
Yes. So that's basically, he was one of the senior brokers. Certainly when I got into the market.
I think I came to know him around early 2000 when he founded or co-founded New Africa Securities, and I know that from around 2009. Maybe 2012, New Africa Securities was one of the top stockbrokers pushing huge volumes. They had a very big hand into the foreign market, and they're doing very well. And as a person, he was a fun-loving guy. I know he was involved with a social soccer team. I've just forgotten the name, but these guys were always they are kicking the ball at Belgravia, and later I also then got involved closely with him when we were setting up Vincent Securities. He was actually our principal stockbroker for a while, and he was actually more like a mentor than a colleague to us. So we really miss him.
A very sad moment. What do you remember of him?
There's that expression in la joie de vivre. He was a life-loving and affirming guy. Very quick to laughter, and I always like to remember, the brighter, more inspiring side of people, and certainly that's what I will remember and miss the most.
And I think during his time as chairman of the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, was it the stock exchange?
No, it was the stock exchange.
Yeah. The committee that he was chairing was quite vibrant in terms of engaging the policymakers, ensuring that the stockbrokers were. Whenever they had grievances and they needed to engage the police framers to, look into the issues, he would really take it upon him. And that it looks like, that spirit sort of went away with that generation.
Yeah, said. Well, our hearts and thoughts and prayers are with the family and the fraternity and everyone, his friends especially. So what are we having today? Something jazzy.
Oh yeah. Well, this is from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society of South Africa, and they have these very colorful names for their tipples, and this one is called Jammy and Jazzy. It's basically quite spicy and and sweet and full of character, and I guess something to drink to send off a mentando.
And what are we having? We're still having the tea.
You guys still have your box with all your colors.
No, it feels
What's happening to the tea? It feels like the tea bags.
Are you already doing some stock taking?
I am, because last time, we had. What's actually happening with the tea? Okay,
absolutely
anyway.
no idea. I never.
Okay, I'm gonna have a Tulsi tea. So invigorating black tea blend with a rich, full-bodied spices.
Lots of flavor. I like it.
I do.
I'm just doing green tea. Says medium bodied with earthly and grassy notes, a light finish with a refreshing cooling quality. I think that's what I need on a.
I think you guys are really going to miss that box when you're done with it.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Well,
have you made a plan to
restock,
to buy another one? To find out where you got this.
Well, I think our
I'm sure one of our viewers will gift us.
Exactly.
Because clearly, it's quite clear that we've enjoyed this one.
In almost 4 years of recording, you guys do very poorly on the gift receiving side. So if when this is done, it might be another 2-3 years, eh?
Well, I'm hoping that the benefactor will find it appropriate to send another box.
Apparently,
but
it seems easier to gift someone alcoholic beverages than anything, eh?
Mm-hmm. You know what they say, Tinashe?
I don't know why.
You know what they say about hope?
What do they say? It's a name.
Hope is not a plan.
So yesterday was Workers' Day, May Day, depending on what part of the world you live in.
And the two are synonymous, somebody.
So let's have a useful debate.
Sure.
And I know that you guys are on different sides of this particular debate, so it'll be quite interesting just to hear your thoughts. Your views on Workers' Day, on the few workers that we actually have in this country, and what you think about.
What do you mean few workers? People still work for a living, even those ones in the informal sector.
But
I'm going to get philosophical and historical a little bit, if you indulge me. So the whole Workers' Day, idea was invented by communists, and it's really it goes back to Karl Marx and his theory of the means of production and how value is created, and his belief, which has since been debunked many times, that the magic source in value creation and in the means of production is actually the worker, not the entrepreneur, not the capitalist. And and this whole ideology of communism is built on this idea, and the idea of having May Day or Workers' Day was to actually push this ideology that the cog at the center of value creation is actually the worker, which is not true. And I think that across Africa, most states actually celebrate May Day as a national holiday, and it speaks to some of the ideology and thinking that underpins the leadership in Africa and a lot of economic policy in Africa. And I believe that's one of the main reasons why Africa is poor, because we still hold on to these ideas that have failed to create wealth and prosperity. So I actually think that it's an opportunity to reflect on that and perhaps do things differently.
Karanga, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know whether I agree. In fact, I don't agree with him when he seems to take a shot at the importance of the worker in the entire capitalistic sort of setup. An employee is still important. I think it was the thinking of having maybe a celebration like May Day and all issues related to labor is a realization that maybe the power dynamics between the employer and the employee always favor the employer. And it is only when employees have come together that maybe their voice can be heard, and issues that they may have within the employment relationship they can be heard and be addressed. Certainly workers know that the employer, the capitalist, is the one who has put in their money, they've taken the risk, but it's also important that in that whole matrix, obviously, you don't sort of perpetuate a culture of exploitation. And so when you look at the issue of the May Day the May Day, as it were, in relation to Zimbabwe, obviously you need to then also look at our history, and that capitalism had a sort of a racial sort of bias for the longest time, where the settlers were mostly the people that were really driving private businesses, and because of that, there was that exploitation along racial lines, in addition to exploitations along whether one contributes capital or labor. So these celebrations or this day was always a reminder to I think to all stakeholders that even as the capitalist goes ahead with his objective of making more profit, they have to do it in an environment.
So why is it we don't have an Employers' Day?
Because they are not victims. How can we?
So workers are victims.
Of course. They are not underdogs.
You're a lawyer. Where's the victimhood? You're a lawyer. Please explain.
But I've already spoken about it.
You're a lawyer, so
yes, you talked about history, but we're in 2025.
But no, I'm saying
So why don't they go to the courts? If they're a victim, why are they not going to a court?
No, they are a victim to the system. Even the courts, like the moment you start...
So they're a victim to the system, so how are employers not also victim to the system? Because they pay...
They're the ones who are creating it. They're the ones who have created the system.
The employers have created the system.
Yes, because you set up your company, so you're the one who's...
No, under the laws of Zimbabwe, the state is in charge.
Don't even go there. Let's not talk about the laws, because the Karl Marxes that you're talking about, they will tell you that the law is actually a system that is sort of influenced by the capitalists to try and perpetuate their exploitation of the worker. So, what constitutes the law in
which capitalists?
Are you a closet Marxist, Tranga?
No. I'm just articulating.
No, I'm saying. Okay,
the issue of Marxism.
I thought you made a very good point of the reasons why we need to have a Workers' Day, and workers do play an important role in the capitalist system or in any system. And I'm like, oh, okay, if they have their day, fantastic. Great for them. Why can't we also have an Employers' Day?
Or an Entrepreneurs' Day?
Or an Entrepreneur
But
Day.
no one has stopped it from setting it up. But, as we know, like in society, it's usually the underdogs that have to sort of come up and then maybe designate a day. That's why we have more like Mother's Day, Mother's Day.
We also have Father's Day.
Yeah. No, I think Father's Day is just...
That's a bad example.
No.
But
Father's Day is more like
what's so funny about that example? Because he's a father, he doesn't realize that there's Father's Day.
No, but is it? Look, I think Father's Day is more like a recent creation or whatever. Generally, men, we don't celebrate those days. Yeah, But
so are you saying the employer is a man?
In this relationship, the employer has got more influence and power and authority. So if they are left to their own devices, they can possibly exploit the employee.
The courts will beg to differ with you.
Let's give Tinashe the last word, because I think you are capable of being balanced.
No, he's not balanced.
I said he's
on your side.
I've said my piece. I said that you've made a very good point about why we need to have Workers' Day, and I think that we should celebrate workers from early morning to midday, and then in the afternoon we should just celebrate the employers because
And the
they're
entrepreneur.
equally important, and the entrepreneur.
But
as
it's
well.
not like it's mutually exclusive.
So let's just have another
Yeah.
day.
So look, it's up to the employers. If employers feel that they need
but
to
do you
have a day,
understand the historical?
It's a national holiday.
Do you understand the historical context, though, of why it's May 1? Like where it came from and what it actually speaks to beyond just the worker,
you can articulate it.
which is it's a communist ideology, right? Where they're saying that the worker is not just important, but is the single most indispensable cog in the means of production system, right? Which is why it's actually the central thesis of Marxism, which has failed wherever it's been tried. So when I think about it from a Zimbabwean perspective, right, I'm saying if we are celebrating a Marxist tradition, right, to what extent does that ideology infect our economic policy, and does that also not explain why we're so poor?
I wouldn't look at it as a Marxist ideology. Maybe the history is linked or attached to Marxism, but I think this day has also taken some significance of its own from within the workers' body. So look, if it's just one day in 365, 366, that way...
That we don't work, that we celebrate.
Yes, workers will just reflect on their contribution to the profit-making objective of the capitalist, and maybe hopefully the capitalist would also just take some minutes to appreciate the work that is being done by these stakeholders. By the way, I don't agree with the Marxist thinking that is the worker at the core. I look at the worker as one of the stakeholders. So the capitalist is important, the worker is important, and then the
national holiday. The national holiday is not speaking to your philosophy.
You guys are always on holiday. As capitalists, you can go wherever you want, whenever you want. You don't have to have a leave form signed by someone. You can just decide to say, I'm going to...
Let's get into the weeds. So liquidity crunch plagues winter wheat contracting. The current liquidity squeeze is stifling financing of the upcoming winter wheat production system, which could impact the overall output. And this is coming from the contractors themselves. The currency, it says there are foreign currency shortages worsened by tightening of the ZiG supply by the authorities has presented headaches for financiers and farmers across the country amid rising costs of imports. So Graham Murdoch called for the urgent need for tailored financial solutions for sustainable wheat production. I think we've seen this story. I think this was a Cinderella story or a darling story over the last 2 seasons of wheat production. And essentially, the prices that GMB was providing was way higher than the world prices. And then we had the contractors haven't been paid by government for a very long time. So I think that now the chickens have come home to roost. And I think that's why this season it's becoming problematic, where we actually do have forex shortages. Would you like to speak to that? Or let's start with the farmer.
He simply identifies as a farmer.
Anyway,
let's hear from him.
Before I get into this issue, I just thought maybe let's celebrate the fact that we now have got 9,000 subscribers, at least 9,000 subscribers.
Well done.
Cheers to that.
Right. Cheers. Thank you to everybody that's been sharing, that's been liking, and that's actually been subscribing. This is the sort of thing that we live for. These are the numbers that we actually enjoy. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So you see,
does it mean that our content manager is actually doing our job?
No, it just means that the workers are doing their job. The workers here and the workers are behind the scene. So at the end of the day, you then realize.
So they deserve a holiday.
We deserve a holiday. That's why we're celebrating it.
Well, Tinashe and I don't identify as the workers here.
Of course,
we're the talent. We're the talent.
Oh, you see. These guys are workers. I know them. They work for the show.
Okay.
So I was just.
So you're the capitalist.
I'm a co-worker.
Fate loves irony.
I'm a co-worker.
Serious irony. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So the issue of the wheat farming and these whole issues around the producer price and etc. It always create problems. The fact that every time or before the farming season, government is giving out inputs, and when the crop has been harvested, they have to announce some sort of a producer price, which usually tends to be way above international commodity prices. For example, I know maize should be around 376 or 367 thereabouts, but yet we have got a model that I believe works very well that we have in tobacco farming. So right now I think about 90% of tobacco is now being funded by
tobacco merchants.
Yeah, by tobacco merchants. So if a crop is good enough, it will attract funding on its own. And I just thought maybe it's a model that we need to think seriously about and say how can we sort of replicate it in other commodities. Surely wheat is is important supposedly. There must be someone who's willing to fund it, and if they do that, they are funding it in commercial terms.
So in other words, he's saying that we should just have a market system. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, in fact, actually, we've run kind of like an A/B experiment with this, because we used to have the AGA, which basically was a consolidation of the Dairy Marketing Board, which became Dairy Board, and the Cotton Marketing Board, which became COTCO, and the Grain Marketing Board, which still exists. And the Dairy Marketing Board and the Cotton Marketing Board were commercialized. They became public companies. And we don't have a problem allocating capital to dairy. The market seems to function quite well. COTCO was a very successful public company for many, many years until some regulatory challenges, destroyed that business model. But here in Zimbabwe, we've actually run that experiment where you've got parts of the agricultural sector that are heavily regulated, like grain, with the Grain Marketing Board, and then with dairy it was liberalized. Which one works better? It's
I think
very clear.
With wheat it was working very well until the GMB decided to just butt in, and they offered prices that were way higher than the market producer prices, and then that distorted everything because actually the government can't pay.
We are not a natural wheat producing country, by the way. So wheat likes the cold, and there's a reason why the biggest wheat producers in the world are all
Europe,
in the northern parts of Ukraine, Russia, the United States, Canada. So, in fact, the entire wheat industry in our country was built and driven by the idea of import substitution post UDI. It's not so in a normal free market, you wouldn't allocate capital to it. Our arable land is better suited to other crops,
like tobacco.
Exactly. So this, and the thing is, the problem I have with it is you have this capital allocation by the state, and it's funded by the taxpayer, and it doesn't produce the desired outcomes. So we just lose money year in, year out, allocating an inordinate amount of capital to this wheat space, and we don't get the production, and we end up importing anyway. We should just liberalize.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
It doesn't make sense.
But and it comes with quite a number of problems, and I think one big one is around electricity usage. So as we're getting into winter, you tend to see ZESA is going to say we are prioritizing wheat farmers. So the whole country is affected.
So that's a double subsidy. We're subsidizing the farmer, the prices, and then we're subsidizing ZESA.
That's not the and even availability. It means other businesses, other industries won't be, we then have to, be on a generator for much longer, simply because we are trying to ensure that wheat farmers have got uninterrupted supply of electricity. And when you look at the benefit side, the benefits really don't justify the cost, which is one big issue that I have with the way we do farming in terms of the policy framework, that we've got this policy of funding inputs and those kind of things, but we never really sit down at the end of the day to say, the expenses versus the revenue or the outcomes. Is it worth doing that? Unless maybe it's because maybe someone sees an opportunity for rent-seeking behavior, or try to benefit from it.
Well, here's a story in agriculture that's actually positive. Zimbabwe becomes the 5th largest avocado producer in Africa. Zimbabwe has become the 5th largest avocado producer in Africa. Production has risen by 164% to 47 tons to now 125 tons. And government-private sector investment, as well as strengthened international engagement. Export earnings are expected to rise, with the horticulture sector targeting $1 billion. Grow avocado trees.
Well, there's no GMB. There are no producer prices there. So if you look at the
and it's all export facing.
Yeah. So. If you look at the history from the private sector, I think in the last 10, 15 years, we saw some of the big corporate farming entities actually shifting away the capital allocation or from other crops or from other products. For example, we saw some of them actually stopping altogether producing coffee, or even reducing tea production, and that they were expanding into other areas, for example macadamia and avocado, for the simple reasons that the demand for those products was soaring, and also the prices were good. So this is what happens when you let private sector be involved in production activities, because they always follow where the money is. Imagine if there was government, I think we would still be stuck in a situation where we still produce coffee, we still produce tea, more tea, even
and further subsidies.
Yes, further subsidies.
Necessary. Yeah, Rupar, your thoughts on this? Avocado seems to be doing very well.
Yeah, and I think
so there is a glimmer of hope in agriculture in Zimbabwe, if it's just market determined. The prices are market determined. Let producers decide what they want to produce, and if there's a market,
and guys can do their numbers. And there's a market that is Zim demand agnostic. It's going to generate hard currency, and I want to point out that this success is in spite of shaky tenure. Right, so these are folks who probably are leasing somebody's land, somebody who's got an A2 letter of allocation. They don't have security of tenure, but the returns have been attractive enough to justify the risk and the investment. Can you imagine how many more stories like this we would be talking about if there was no cloud over tenure? If you had security of tenure, imagine if there was no cloud over retention, because obviously these guys did their numbers.
The growth would just be massive.
And the 30% retention, they probably priced it in to their model, and it still made sense, and they're still making money, and they're still growing production. Imagine if we didn't have that uncertainty or that concern. So we're really punching well below our weight in the agricultural sector.
Okay.
And free markets actually work, even for
workers.
even for the unsophisticated citizen, there's a massive shift that is taking place. Even if when you go into the communal areas, farmers are moving away from maize into tobacco.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and the thinking is, you know what? I can always buy maize if I want, if I have to. But if I have to grow tobacco, I sell it. I've got cash. With cash, I can do whatever I want. And it's not because there was a deliberate government policy to say, stop growing tobacco. Maize, go into. So if you just let
the market be.
Yeah.
Let the market be. So let's get into mining. We've got a number of news there. We've got...
This guy doesn't like workers.
We have no issues with workers.
None whatsoever.
So
I said they should have their
what's
day.
What's wrong with them having a day?
No, I said kudos to them. They should have their day, and so should employers.
You can have 364 days as your employer's day.
National days. So Rio Tinto, RioZim actually. RioZim teeters on the brink. RioZim Limited in Zimbabwe is facing potential court-ordered corporate rescue or receivership amid severe financial distress. It's owing its workers about $5.6 million in wages accumulated and tax arrears. It's in problems, and it's in diamonds and gold. Then we've got a Zimplats story here where production dipped by 11%. Zimplats reported a 11% drop in platinum production for the quarter ended 2025. Due to limited ability of machinery and electricity. And this is what we're seeing in the mining sector. And then there's another interesting story here where the Young Miners Foundation is saying let's formalize and professionalize small-scale miners. Again, it wants the formalization and professionalization of small-scale miners to make meaningful contribution to the sector. So there is this awareness that actually when we formalize, we're better off. But when you formalize and you're better off, then you're getting these stories about Rio Tinto and you're getting these stories about Zimplats. What's actually happening? Maybe you've got a better feel on what's happening with RioZim.
So just to give you some background, it's called RioZim because it used to be part of Rio Tinto, which is one of the major global mining houses. And at some point, Rio Tinto, decided it was too hard to do business in Zimbabwe, and they exited. I don't want to go into the specifics of what's happening at RioZim, but what I can speak to is just the macroeconomic environment in which a former mining business like RioZim would be working in. And, they've got all these challenges. And ideally, they should be able to raise capital quite easily to fund growth and expansion. But they haven't been able to. They've had all these challenges. And, so we've seen this across.
But they can't find funding in mining sector. And mining sector seems to be doing
and also
very well, especially gold.
Other mining houses. I think there's Blanket Mine. There's Padenga's mining operations and etc. They seem to be doing very well. So, whereas I agree with you that the macroeconomic environment hasn't been favorable, but there is also an element of micro issues, management related or leadership related or whatever is going on. It's been in this situation for a very long time. I know at dollarization that quite a significant chunk of what became Zamco loans were RioZim loans. Quite a number of banks had exposure to them. At that point, around that time, I was still in a bank. Look, it was. So I think as a business, they've had their own issues. In addition, obviously, to the macro environment. So we don't want to always blame the macros.
Well, I think the Miners Association are facing headwinds, and they've raised these issues as far as energy price and availability of energy. And this comes back full circle to
the macro,
to the issue that we were talking about, our wheat farmers, that the little energy that we have, we're giving it to the wheat farmers, and then eventually they are heavy users of energy, but it turns out that they will eventually
they're not creating as much value as
they're not creating as much value. And yet in mining, what we really need to be doing is directing the little energy that we have towards
gold is at a record high. $3,500 an ounce.
So why can't we be nifty around this decision making and say, you know what, we're better off earning enough in US dollars, and then we just import our wheat, rather than this continuing to flog a dead horse and hoping that it will come alive, but it's not gonna. Zimplats, what's actually happening at Zimplats? Because production is down.
Oh, that's got to do with platinum prices. They're not great. They haven't been for the last 18 months. So we did see some layoffs in the platinum sector, and they're also affected by the availability of power and the challenges around that. But I think for the most part, what's happening there is just the price of platinum is facing some headwinds at the moment, and in the commodity space, miners are price takers. They don't set the price, So if the price takes a beating, you're in trouble. And the only way you can respond meaningfully is to actually start cutting costs, and sometimes that means cutting production.
Okay, true. Then the next one is RBZ restarts gold coins minting. The Reserve Bank is again issuing gold coins. It scrapped 10 months ago. A step. And okay, sorry. Okay, this is badly written. But the idea is they've just introduced gold coins again, so people can actually buy gold coins using the local currency as well as our currency.
Yeah, look, I find it fascinating that we've revisited gold coins. It's not like the institution that's issuing them enjoys the faith and confidence of the market. I don't know why,
But clearly, there's an arbitrage. I mean, if you're paying,
if you get the fiscal coin, it's okay. It's not a problem.
If you're using Zig to get a physical coin,
even if you get it from a Dodge outfit, as long as you can certify that this is like 99 point whatever % gold, then that's okay.
Just move around with
it. Yeah, but then there's a virtual one, right, where you get a piece of paper that says you've got. Because on the other side of this, there's gold, right? And why would you believe that?
So that's a problem.
I think the virtual
one is as good as our currency. Our currency is actually called Zim Gold. The Zig is actually Zim Gold.
So what are they saying? If our currency is called Zim Gold,
so basically,
but they're saying you can use Zim Gold to buy
gold,
real gold,
digital gold coins. Look, I think they're trying to raise money.
Real gold.
Yeah. So I think just like initially, remember when the gold coin was announced?
Did you get this?
Yeah, I got it.
Zim Gold
is buying gold.
Zimbabwe Gold.
Zimbabwe Gold is buying gold made in Zimbabwe.
Yeah. You shouldn't need to. You shouldn't need to, because the Zim Gold is supposed to be backed by gold anyway.
By gold anyway.
By gold and hard currency, and it's not clearly. I mean, gold is at an all-time high, and the valuation of Zig hasn't changed.
The Reserve Bank, right? Because if the Reserve Bank is telling us that Zimbabwean gold, which is our currency, can now and is able to now buy gold. Then is Zimbabwean gold actually backed by gold?
No, I mean
that
look. There's just
it references some
secular.
Gold.
It's secular referencing.
It references some gold, according to the minister.
Are we not getting it? Zimbabwean gold currency can now buy gold, physical gold, or gold coins, but we're told that Zimbabwean gold is backed 100% by gold.
Well, not 100%, but
Gold and foreign currency.
Gold and foreign currency. Look,
No, there's a correction. They came out saying, no, it's not bagged. We didn't mean it was bagged. But
So what is it?
I don't know. So
Okay.
even the referencing again still
There's a lot of circular reference there, but
yeah.
I think what effectively they're telling us is you're better off just buying the bullion rather than keep Zimbabwean gold in quotes. Anyway, let's move on. There's a debt issue that the IMF warns Zimbabwe over debt arrears. So the IMF has warned Zimbabwe and four other African nations to stop accumulating foreign debt arrears as it undermines fiscal policy and public service delivery. Zimbabwe remains in debt distress and is engaged in a debt resolution process. This has been going on for the last 4 years. Do you think that there is light at the end of the tunnel? What do you guys, the IMF is warning about this debt distress, but Zimbabwe has been in debt distress for the last 25 years.
So Argentina just raised $20 billion from the IMF, and they were able to use this capital to freely float the exchange rate. They, under President Milei, have introduced a whole bunch of reforms to cut government spending, to cut regulation, to liberalize the economy. And in slightly over a year, they're in a place to raise $20 billion and completely liberalize their currency. So I think that there are many teachable moments in the journey that Argentina has taken under Milei. And so if we embrace that policy change that Argentina did, then there is line of sight to us being able to restructure our debt, raise money on global capital markets, and move from.
If it's as simple as you say, why have we been caught in this again circular reference for the last 4 years?
But it says if, and that's
we need to pivot, right? It's a significant policy pivot.
But we've been caught in this
because we haven't pivoted. We've been doing the same thing over and over, and expecting to get a different result.
And there's an analyst I would ask you to say, put some number. What's the probability of that if materializing, embracing, our reforms and maybe taking some lessons from Argentina?
Look, I'm not hopeful. I think on balance of probability, I think the probability is low. I'll put it at
the IMF is going to be writing this and warning Zim again next year.
Yeah. And, look, we might be sitting here, discussing this debt issue and etc. And, we take it to be such a serious issue. But I'm not quite sure whether within the corridors of, policymakers, it's such a big issue to them. Because I'm not seeing even small little steps towards addressing that. We still have got, we were talking about suppliers who are owed money, and it's local debt, but it's debt nonetheless. So they're actually accumulating local arrears at a faster pace. So we are not seeing anything that should give us confidence that they will be able to clear or at least find resolutions to the international debt issue. It doesn't seem to be such a priority. To the policy.
Your point is well taken, but it raises other issues. If government cannot pay its suppliers, but Tuli has come out with a report. This was the post-cabinet media briefing where he says Zimbabwe's government has reported a budget surplus. Where have we heard this before?
From the same minister many times over the last since 2018.
Okay, so he's unable to pay his suppliers, but apparently we have a budget surplus for the first quarter this year, underscoring the administration's unwavering commitment to fiscal discipline. So when we look at the numbers, revenue for the quarter reached 1.57 US billion, and we can sort of, there are no currency distortions because currency has been more or less stable in the last quarter, while expenditure was held in check at 1.53 billion, resulting in a modest but significant budget surplus. So
Which currency is that?
This is in
Zimbabwe
US
gold.
dollars.
Okay.
This is US dollars.
Okay.
But we still can't pay our suppliers. We still can't pay TBs. But apparently we have a surplus.
Yeah, look, these announcements strain credibility. It's just hard as an analyst to say the announcements and what we see and hear on the ground, corroborate each other. There's definitely a disconnect. Hopefully, Treasury will take steps to share more numbers to help bridge that gap between what we see on the ground and here, and this announcement that there's a budget surplus. Because if we're not accruing, the easiest way for an accountant to report a profit is just not to expense things, right? If you haven't paid for them, you just push them to the next reporting period. But that's
Don't teach us bad habits.
but that just doesn't, it's not a.
So, gentlemen, there's something here around SI29, and you guys are in the market. Maybe you can just explain to us the impact.
It's about what? What does it speak to? Because
VVAX is no longer regulated by ZIM or something to that effect. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or you haven't looked at it.
No,
okay.
I haven't.
Okay, if we haven't looked at it, then I suggest that we do so.
SIs are
They keep changing.
Yeah, so you wouldn't know which is which.
Okay, I think we can talk about it later on. But maybe we can also then let's have a discussion around the market actually itself. What's actually happening in the market, the stock market, and where do you guys see things, as we head towards the half year?
So the liquidity challenges or shortages that we are experiencing as an economy obviously are also affecting the market across the board. So there's ZIG liquidity challenges, and then also USD liquidity problems. So without the liquidity, obviously the market activity is going to be affected. But also the macro picture is not exciting. So, the profit prospects for businesses are not such that will attract investment into the listed businesses. And the macros that the policy environment around, our ability to settle. So if a foreigner who has got investment here decides to take their money out and the bank does a transfer, how long does it take to clear? We still got legacy debt problems, so it means we won't be able to attract money into the country. If anything, we have seen flows going the other direction, where investors have been taking their money out of Zimbabwe, and in terms of the capital raising space, the market is not able to. If someone wants to do a capital raise, it's such a difficult thing. So it affects the ability of the market to have IPOs.
But we've seen the
rights issues and etc.
Padenga has been raising money for gold
on the local market.
It's probably international.
It's probably international, and also because of some structures that they can put in place to, assure investors that they will get a return.
Yeah, you remember gold is at an all-time high, and the principal shareholders in Padenga also run very cash-rich, profitable businesses. So they've got capacity in any capital raise to also commit to participate and engender some confidence with any new investor. I think it's also worth mentioning that one of the reasons why gold is at an all-time high is because of the uncertainty and volatility in global capital markets that is a result of the current tariff war, right? And what's clear is that there isn't going to be a speedy resolution to this tariff war. Container shipping out of China to the US market has dropped significantly. And, all the indications are, in fact, this week we saw Q1 GDP numbers for the United States. We saw a modest contraction of about 0.3%. The outlook is negative. We are likely to have 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, which is the definition of a recession. By all indication, China is also going to experience a contraction. So what that means from a Zimbabwean perspective is when the global economy is contracting, it consumes less commodities. It consumes less of pretty much everything except gold, which is considered a safe haven, which is why we're seeing record high prices. So what we're likely to experience over the next few weeks and months is softer prices for everything that we export on the commodity side, whether it's tobacco or some of the other minerals that we export that go into manufacturing, whether it's lithium or chrome or whatever it is. So we've got enough problems as it is, without the world going into a recession. And certainly, the headwinds will be negative for Zim going forward. So I think, anybody who's looking out into the second half of 2025 that's doing business in Zim, even if you're an exporter, I think the outlook is negative. I think one would be well served to batten the hatches a little bit and be more conservative, especially if you were bullish.
Okay. Thoughts about that, about the global economy and what we can do?
Look, I agree with Rufaro that globally investors are becoming more risk averse because of all the headwinds that are there. I think that's why we're seeing the flow of capital into safe-haven assets like gold. And what it means is for an emerging market, or more like a frontier market, such as Zimbabwe, when the global investor is becoming less risk averse, it becomes risk averse. It means flows into this part of the world are going to be very limited. And just look, and then consider the fact that we are actually not among the best in terms of the emerging markets or frontier markets. When investors are looking to take money out of move capital out of North America and Europe, it just tells you how difficult it's going to be for us to attract capital. And portfolio investments tend to be the first line of investment. So if investors are feeling bullish, before you get any FDI into your country, you usually get portfolio investors, because it's easy to get money in and out of the country. So if that is not happening because of rising global risk aversion, it means that even in terms of it makes it even harder for the country to receive foreign direct investment, because now it means instead of just if people are not comfortable bringing in 10-15 million into a listed instrument, what are the chances that they'll bring in more of it to set up a factory and start operating from here? So that's where the problem is. One would think that maybe with this gold price boom, we would see quite a number of investors coming into the country looking for gold claims to try and take advantage of that. But it doesn't look like we are winning on that side again. We've just spoken about how an established mining business is already struggling. So it's really it's going to just make things are only going to get tighter because of all that is happening around us. We don't have capacity internally. There's no capital internally to fund, the needs of the businesses. So if foreign capital is also not favoring your markets, then we are going to be an undercapitalized economy for a long time.
Africa, what's happening in Africa? I mean, we had South Africa, the VAT issue was a big one there. Their economy is also, experiencing some headwinds, and they're looking at growth less than 1%. But the rest of Africa, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a policy issue. It's, I think one of the sad realities about Africa is that a lot of the liberation movements were funded by Maoist, communist, by Maoists or communists, right? So that ideology is what they indoctrinated the liberation movements with, and amazingly, notwithstanding all the evidence that this doesn't really work, it's endured. So in terms of the thinking. So if you read beyond the economic policy and listen to some of the ideology coming from the policymakers, they believe in wealth distribution. They believe that capitalism is exploitative and needs to be heavily regulated or tapered. And that's really why we've underperformed our potential. Whether it's when you look at it from a Zimbabwean perspective or South African perspective, they've got these really regressive labor laws. They are now thinking and talking about land expropriation. These are all things that are not friendly to capital, and you actually need capital to flow into your country to stimulate growth. They don't have huge savings in South Africa, so if you're not attracting huge amounts of capital every year to invest and stimulate growth in your economy, you're not going to, where's the growth going to come from? And that's true across many African countries where the ruling parties were basically
There's an argument that has been put across by Frans Cronje in South Africa, and he argues that the problem that you have with the ANC is a structural one, just stemming from what you've just highlighted in terms of the Communist Manifesto that drives their programs. But there's another structural problem is that the National Executive is made out of 100 members who hate each other and who can never agree on anything. Even if they didn't hate each other, they would not be able to agree on anything, because it's like so unless you change the structural apparatus of the ANC itself, and I suppose it's also true of African countries. So if you look at Zimbabwe, Zanu-PF, how many members are in its Politburo? And you look at the Chinese, how many members does the Chinese,
well, the standing committee only has 7 people.
It has 7 people, and that's a proper board. If you think about it, that's a $16-17 trillion economy, and the Chinese Communist Party has 7 people, and that's a board that's making decisions.
Absolutely.
So whether you agree with them or not, but I think that
the
it's
capacity
easier.
To move is
it's quite evident. When you look at the Zanu-PF Politburo, or I don't know what the equivalent would be, I think it has more than 100 members. The ANC, much smaller economy, and it has over 100 members who all don't agree and who all have very varied viewpoints on where things should go. And you can't run a company like that, let alone a country. Any thoughts? Because you're a resident communist. Maybe you can help us to understand, how these guys actually make up.
Honorable member, please withdraw that statement.
Withdrawn.
Thank you. So I was going to comment on what Shumba was talking about, that the problem of Africa is the underlying ideology. I don't think it's correct. because otherwise what explains for the primitive accumulation of wealth that is happening within the top echelons of the ruling elite? That's not communism. Surely that's not what Mao or Marx or any godfathers of communism were envisaging. So I think we need to separate between the ideology and how those sort of communist-inspired political organizations sort of mutated or transformed over time.
Do you think Mao's meal plan changed during the Great Famine?
But that's more like survival. But what you are seeing here is not survival.
It's still it's tomahawk. But the point is, so I take your point. It's a valid point that it's not necessarily the ideology. But now that we know that you have national executive of the ANC, you have 100 members. Our Zanu-PF Politburo has I don't know how many members, and yet the Chinese Communist Party has 7 people that sit in the board and can make decisions.
Certainly, that Chinese model is much better because it's easier for 7 people to really get the business going or the discussions going, agreeing or otherwise, as opposed to 100. But when I look at maybe these African liberation movements that then came into power, the numbers and how they've got these big numbers, I think just trying to accommodate each other politically.
But
I think the country,
what we're saying is,
the country is much bigger. It offers opportunities in other areas. I think they should be they should still be able to accommodate their comrades elsewhere, without necessarily creating a huge bureaucracy.
So that the decision-making body has to have 7 members or less, because 7 members.
I'm agnostic. If whether they have 100 members or 10 or 5, if they have the wrong ideology, right? If they believe in wealth redistribution, if they believe in all kinds of unreasonable labor regulations that make business people less likely to hire because it's harder to fire people, if you've got all these high taxes and exchange controls that make it harder to move money in and out of your jurisdiction, it doesn't matter how many people are in the executive. The money is not going to come through.
I think that the principle of efficiency, the principle of a growing economy, is pretty much common. Whether you're a socialist or you're a capitalist, you want the economy to grow. It's the how that differs, right? And I was just saying that if you have a 100-member national executive like the ANC has, it means you literally don't move. So even if you believe in the economy, because I think ANC still believes in gear is what they termed it, 4% growth or 5% growth per annum. That is what we want to do. But you will never achieve that if you have 100 people who are trying to make a decision.
No, but okay. Let's zoom out and look at the global stage and compare China, which is run by a 7-member standing committee of the Politburo, and then you look at the U.S. executive, right? So you've got this cabinet that's much bigger than the 7-member standing committee. You've got 535 people in Congress. It's messy, but it's got a framework.
That's the legislator. We're talking about in a communist party. We're saying there's an ideology, there's a party that dominates the economy. And we're trying to understand what the problem are. And yes, we've acknowledged that, yes, ideology is part of it. And I think that ideology will be very difficult to change if you have a 100-member. And the leader seeks consensus. You cannot move unless you have consensus. Now, try to get consensus from 7 members.
Yeah, that's easier.
And for 100 members, it's just going to be, it's chalk and cheese. And I think that's, once we start being a meritocracy, and having 7 members means we actually are a meritocracy to some extent, because who gets into that 7? It can't be people who are very good at, throwing their arms in the air. It must be people who have proven themselves to be worthy to be the 7. So forget about ideology, but just on competence, because even the socialists want economic growth. So where are you going to get the economic growth? Well, at least with a board that can move. and not a board that is paralyzed. And that's the problem that you have with the ANC. That's the problem that you have right across Africa. I'm not saying that that's the bigger problem. I agree with you, Rufaro. Ideology is a bigger problem. But surely we can be efficient within the capitalist or these big party models. Yeah. So, okay, I withdrew my comment earlier. But as somebody who understands socialist parties, who understands Zanu-PF, who understands CCM in Tanzania, who understands ANC, do you think that there is a role where they could actually reform how their parties are actually organized, taking into consideration what the Chinese have done in organizing the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, I don't know how I've suddenly become an expert in those. but my response is going to be very difficult because for them to do that, it means they have to disappoint some of their comrades. So theoretically, you are looking at a situation where maybe if there was, say, out of interest, there was some other political organization, some ruling party, whether it's MK or DA or EFF, were to take over, and maybe hopefully they don't have these sort of convoluted executive structures, and then sort of showcases what an efficient government can achieve, and that actually gets to achieve those sort of objectives. I think it is at that point that maybe we'll then have even start dreaming of.
For an example.
Yeah.
Well, we have an example in Argentina. I don't know.
We are talking about Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he is asking about whether African ruling parties or political organizations are amenable to that transformation. So I don't see it happening with liberation movements, as it were, because the pressure is there's always a next generation of people who wants to to run the ball, as it were. So if you start telling them that, you know what, we are trying to do things by the book.
I think this raises a national question, and Rivara, I don't know what you think about this. We can't be hammering down on ideology when even within the party itself, within its own ideology, they cannot be efficient.
Look, I hear you. I think execution and efficiency is important, but I think ideology is also important. I think if I would err on this, if I had to bet on one horse only, I would bet on ideology and not changing the efficiency of execution, because I think like in the strategy literature, they make the case that direction is more important than speed, right? And so if I was gonna use that to make an analogy to what we're discussing right now, I would say ideology is direction and speed is execution, right? And you don't want to be executing extremely well but heading in the wrong direction.
Okay, and I would say that Peter Drucker tells us that culture, it's strategy any day. And I think that if the culture is wrong, it doesn't matter what the ideology is, even if they do believe in capitalism. So if we were to look at all the 100 members in the national executive of the ANC, we might actually find out that they actually agree with us. Mm-hmm. That everything that we're talking about, they're like, yeah, I think that actually makes sense. But can they implement? They can't.
The culture doesn't allow it.
The culture just doesn't allow it, because you have 100 members trying to make a decision. It's like any company. If you have 100
it's
board
like getting
members.
you guys out of the office here to the studio on time.
Well, actually,
it's like herding cats.
But we were actually on time. It was just the two of us. Now, imagine if there were 100 of us.
Yeah, it's just
So I think that definitely we will not get the alpha that we need, because the alpha that we need a change in ideology, a change in values, a change in principles. But I think that given the constraints that we have, surely what we can do is have a trimmed ANC National Executive Committee. That is in
Execution,
line.
yeah.
You know,
Well-
and then suddenly the culture changes. And once the culture changes, you might find that the 7 that are left might actually agree with us on a number of things. But now they can implement. They can actually say, oh, yeah, we agree with that. Okay, let's actually implement. And then the current system is such that even if they're implementing socialist policies, they will do such a bad job at it that it's actually a cost, a national cost to everybody, like we've seen with the wheat farmers. So I think that I thought that was a very pertinent argument that, you know, these African parties, they should look at the Chinese Communist Party and say, you know what we need is just a 7-member Politburo or national executive, or the highest decision-making body should have as, you know,
few people as possible.
few people as possible. And I think 7 is actually the max, because that's what runs a $16-17 trillion economy. And a $20 billion economy surely should have less people, but we can have 7, and then let's just implement. Similarly with the ANC, that if you just do that, then they would actually implement. Because the first problem is the numbers, the quantity. Then the other cultural problem is you need to have a running consensus. So it's not a majority.
Yeah, so
You know the
it's
difference.
obviously
The
easier.
difference is a majority will vote, and a simple majority will then implement. But consensus means, again, from a communist perspective, I don't know if I'm right. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
All right, guys, at this point,
communist idea is
Tinashe keeps referring me as a communist. I think it's a cue for us to end the show, right?
thank you very much,
Oh, you
ladies
identify
and
as
gentlemen.
a social democrat, right? That's your official.
Exactly.
Okay,
Do you
whatever.
know Politburo as a social democrat? But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please participate in the discussions. What do you guys think? If you know these dominant socialist parties that we have, is it okay for them to have 100 members like the ANC national executive? That's equivalent to a board in the private sector having a 100-member board. Do you think things will actually get done? What would happen if we were to trim and have just 7 members like the Chinese Communist Party has? Please chime in. Let's hear your views and debates. That's what we encourage, and let's just have the discussion. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful Friday evening. That's certainly what we're going to do, and enjoy your weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.